Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Angular World Tour meetup in Belgrade. It's been a year since we founded Angular Belgrade Group, and actually, this meetup is a great way to celebrate that. For today, we have two talks by our guests from Google, Minko Gechev from Angular Core team and James Daniels from Firebase team. Before we start, I want to thank to Tracy, Tara, and this.media for making this event possible today. And so, first talk for today is by Minko. Minko will share with us more about the state of Angular framework. Minko, if you are ready, stage is yours.
Sounds good. Okay, let me go full screen. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Minko Gechev. I'm working on Angular developer relations at Google. Today, I'm going to share with you kind of a horizontal talk on what is the current state of Angular. We're not going to go too much in depth. We're not going to discuss any technical details, really. So I'm relying that you'll be asking us, you'll be like having questions so that we can dig into these later on after the talk. We'll be looking into what the team has been up to, and not only in terms of technology, but also in terms of processes and how we have been working on improving the communication with the community so that you're all aware of what we have been up to. Before we get started, I just want to set the stage by explaining what is actually Angular. I know you're probably all Angular developers, but every technology out there in the JavaScript world has its trade-offs. And in Angular, we specifically decided on trade-offs that we consider to be good in terms of engineering practices and would help you be productive in the long run. So Angular, first of all, is an integrated web platform for the web. We're providing not only a toolkit for developing components, but also a router, forms. We're providing PWA package, a CLI, DevTools, and much more. Angular is also built for everyone. This is one of the guiding mottos for Google as well. We want to build products that are available for everyone. That is why we're very heavily investing in accessibility. Our components team spent most of 2021 in improving the accessibility of our current set of UI components. Angular is opinionated and scalable as well. So if you want to build an application, you must be using TypeScript. We don't have any other options. You will not be able to build your application with plain JavaScript or with PureScript or anything else. We believe that TypeScript is a good engineering practice when it comes down to building web applications, so this is our official recommendation as well. It is also scalable. This means that it doesn't matter really how big your application is. Well, clearly, with larger code bases, there are a lot of challenges that you can hit, but generally, the scalability curve of Angular is relatively smooth. We have some applications which are a couple of hundreds of lines of code at Google, and we also have Google Cloud Console, which is about 14 million lines of code. And well, even though there are definitely challenges with dealing with millions of lines of code, Angular allows you to go there. Angular is also mature and stable and supported. It is pretty mature at this point. It has been around for about 5 years now. We released about 2016. And we have been doing incremental improvements without necessarily rewriting the framework. We did, unfortunately, kind of bust this mistake with AngularJS. We learned from there. So now we have our ng update process that keeps you up to date with the latest changes that we do in the platform. Now, I want to stop a little bit on how Angular and Google, how this relationship goes together, because Angular is an open source project that is very highly impacted by community. And also we have Google, this large company with hundreds of thousands of people working on it, which is supporting the project in different aspects. Generally, the most support we're getting is in terms of collaboration. We're collaborating with a lot of fantastic people within the company. We're getting a lot of validation from the internal teams using Angular. We're getting a lot of support also and expertise. Google is one of the main parties working on the web platform, so we clearly have a lot of expertise in this domain. All right, collaboration. Over the past year, we have been collaborating with many internal teams. James is one of the people we have been working very closely with on Angular Fire. We have deployment functionality there, which allows to deploy your static assets as well as your universal applications with just a single ng deploy command. We have been working very closely with the Chrome team, with the Aurora team on making sure that Angular is performing well according to Core Web Vitals. And we also shared the collaboration with the TensorFlow team. As you have probably seen, Google is really heavily invested in machine learning. And this allows us to work together with machine learning teams so that we can introduce these concepts and help to innovate the web forward. An example of our collaboration is from Google I/O, where we shared our pipeline for predictive prefetching, where you can go from Google Analytics, pipe this to BigQuery. From there, using TensorFlow Extended, build a TensorFlow model that you can convert to TensorFlow.js and run this model in the service worker in your Angular application in order to prefetch products that are very likely to be needed next based on the navigational behavior of your users. You can learn more about this and also about the bindings that we created between Angular and TensorFlow with async pipes and our talk from Google I/O Future-Proof Web Apps. From Google, we are also getting a lot of validation. Validation in terms of validation of the backward compatibility of the framework. 2018, I was not part of the team back then. I was working on my startup Rhyme, and I've been participating frequently Angular meetups. I've been using AngularJS originally, maybe 2011 or 2012. After that, I moved to Angular for the same product, and I was very active in the community. So when I moved from Bulgaria to the United States, I was very frequent participant of the Angular Mountain View meetup. I was pretty excited to be able to go there and hang out with the Angular team. So on one of these meetups, my former colleague now, Rob, he made the very first demonstration of Ivy and showed us how we can build a tiny Hello World application in only about 3.3 kilobytes. I was really excited to see that, and I couldn't wait to get a hold on Ivy. I couldn't wait to start using it in my projects. However, this did not happen until 2 years later, when now, as part of the team, we released Ivy for public consumption. And back then, we knew that Ivy is bringing some value to the community for sure. It was reducing the complexity, and also it was reducing the bundle size of your application with about 30%, because each set of Ivy instructions produced for a particular template is about 30% smaller compared to what we previously had with View Engine. However, it took us a while to migrate absolutely everyone in Google to Ivy and enable it by default for everyone. Internally, we have thousands of applications, and we're responsible for making sure that they compile with the changes that we're making to the framework. So once we completely roll it out for everyone, we noticed some significant improvements. Only for our Google Cloud Console application, we noticed about 90% reduction of computational resources. So the compiler became about 90% more computationally optimized. And the build of this application dropped with about 50 minutes. And yeah, the build pipeline in Google is generally pretty optimized. We have caching on different levels with Bazel, or internally called Blaze. We have remote build execution, so nobody's really building on their local desktop. We're building in the cloud in a very, in a parallel, very concurrent environment. So 50 minutes was a serious saving on top of all the optimizations that are already happening out there. These are some of the improvements that you're probably already seeing in your Ivy applications. And from there, we enabled already a couple of other optimizations that we'll be talking about later in this presentation.
Sorry, Minko. Sorry, Minko. All the time we see only your first slide, State of Angular.
Oh, only my first slide. I'm sorry about that. I showed you so many slides. All right. Is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
All right. The first couple of slides were not tremendously interesting, so there are going to be prettier slides from now on. All right, so I've enabled debugging APIs, and they allow us to build tooling on top of them. This is part of the Angular DevTools released that we shared earlier this year on Google I/O. With Angular DevTools, now you can profile the performance of your application. You can figure out how much time you're spending in each change detection cycle and dig deeper in order to see what lifecycle hook of your particular component instance, for example, contributed to frame drops. Also, we worked on better error messages. Expression changed after checked is probably one of the most controversial errors that you can get. And it is particularly useful in order to enforce more unidirectional data binding flow, and you don't have any cyclic dependencies. So as part of the effort to improve debuggability, IB allows us to improve the process for debugging. Expression has changed after it has been checked a little bit with more accurate source maps, and also allowed us to add guides and videos directly to the error messages. As you can imagine, with the very dynamically evolving web, making a very long-term and strict roadmap might not be as trivial as we wish it was, because there is a new JavaScript technology coming out every other week, and the web standards are evolving constantly. We have a new version of JavaScript every other year, and they're introducing new features to which Angular needs to keep up to date with. And this very much impacts our planning process. It's hard for us to make a plan for the next 10 years and follow it very strictly, because in the meantime, we need to adapt to what is happening in the web. So this is why it took us a while to have a roadmap that sets the right expectation for the community, and we're able to communicate it properly with everyone. However, we released our roadmap finally, finding the right balance between being dynamic and also setting the correct expectations. So currently it's tracking about 35 projects and has over 300,000 views. Looks like folks are interested in following what is going to happen with Angular in the future. So I'm thankful for you being that engaged. In this process of building Ivy, which took us about 2.5 to 3 years, we collected quite a lot of technical debt. Not all of it was Ivy related, but our focus was so much into optimizing the framework for producing smaller templates and for reducing the complexity by removing the concept of factories that we couldn't really be as efficient as we hoped we were in triaging issues. Also, we have monorepos, right? In a monorepo, we have not one package, but we're hosting dozens of packages only in github.com/Angular/Angular. So we're getting issues and feature requests for all these packages. And eventually we ended up with about 3,000 issues, which was very much something that we wanted to improve. Over the past couple of months, we went through different efforts. We have the Fix-It effort, where for a week we're spending all our time only in triaging issues. We had the Operation Bylog project, where we were spending up to 50% of our time in resolving issues. And we also introduced a feature request automation, which now allows people to vote for a particular feature request that they like to see in the framework. And that would also allow us to prioritize them by the people's desire to use a particular feature. We currently dropped the amount of issues with about 50%. And we're very determined to continue doing that by listening to what developers' needs are and helping them even contribute with their features if they have the bandwidth for. So triaging them, supporting them in the process from opening a pull request to getting into the framework. On social media, you can see us being very loud recently. We have had quite a few social media campaigns on Twitter and on YouTube. On YouTube, we had our 100,000 subscriber. So thank you for that. If you haven't subscribed yet, check out our YouTube channel. Mark, specifically, Mark from our team, has been producing a lot of great videos there. And we're going to be sharing a couple of videos on more advanced topics in the next couple of weeks around debugging and profiling, about building tree shakeable code, accessibility, and also some updates about what we introduced as part of version 13. On Twitter, we have been posting tips and tricks. So find us on Twitter. It's twitter.com/Angular. We have our 31 Days of Angular campaign now, which is going to end on New Year's Eve. So now I want to talk a little bit about the RFC process, because this has been one of the initiatives that we kicked off in order to have better communication on larger efforts with the community and to collect feedback to make sure that we're making very informed decisions. In the RFC process, we currently have over 10 RFCs for sure, with a couple of hundreds of comments and many impressions. And it helped us inform some of the decisions that we made for the version 13 release. For instance, the removal of version 11 of Internet Explorer support. Internet Explorer has been holding us back for using CSS variables, intersection observers, and web animations and proxies without polyfills for a while now. So Internet Explorer is no longer part. We no longer have to support it in Angular, which unblocks us from letting people use CSS variables as framework APIs, which is requests that we have been getting for a while, specifically in our material implementation. Another thing that we improved in version 13 is introduction of a new Angular package format, which is way leaner, smaller, and it ships new ECMAScript 2020 output, where we're down-leveling async awaits so that it can have compatibility with Zone.js. We're also distributing partially compiled Angular libraries, which means that we're not shipping IB instructions, but we're shipping a partial format that multiple versions of the Angular compiler can understand and down-level to IB instructions. One of the changes that could be breaking for people here is that we removed our UMD bundles. There is also a guide on Angular IO which tells you how exactly by using Rollup you can build your UMD bundles in case you're using them for your Angular Elements projects. One of the optimizations that I'm particularly excited about, because of several reasons I'm going to share, are in our ng build experience. So having a very encapsulated build pipeline allows us to make changes in it without breaking anyone's project across versions. We can change our build pipeline completely, introduce new tooling or drop tooling, make your build faster without anyone even noticing. So what we did in ng build in actually the minors of version 12, which is now stable in version 13, is to add a couple of steps and replace some of the existing steps in ng build. So when you code npm run build or yarn build or ng build, we're going to invoke webpack. Webpack is going to call our build optimizer that is going to parse the TypeScript code of your application, and it is going to annotate it. It pretty much aims to figure out some pure constructs, some constructs that could be tree shaken, but Cursor, our JavaScript optimizer, doesn't know about that by default. After that, what we did was to introduce ESBuild. So once we go through build optimization, we're passing the outputs to ESBuild, which can perform very efficient variable mangling or renaming in a way that there are no shadowing. So you're not overriding variables when you get outside of the particular block in your code, which makes the variable lookup faster. And from there, the runtime execution of your application gets faster as well. Something special about ESBuild is that it is way faster compared to the other build optimizers out there, such as, let's say, Cursor. So we can perform subset of the steps of the optimizations with ESBuild in a way more efficient way. We like ESBuild in particular because it produces correct code. There are other build optimizers out there which are even faster, but sometimes they produce broken code, which is really hard to debug, especially for your production builds. ESBuild allowed us to have good balance between speed and correctness. Once we run your application with ES-build and optimize it, we're passing it still to Cursor to perform the remaining optimizations that are still not part of the ES-build optimizer. This already decreased the build speed with about 10%. But we did one more optimization in the build optimizer. We changed it to a Babel transform. We're already using Babel as part of our build pipeline, so we just rewrote our custom parsing logic to take advantage of the Babel AST and perform the required traversal so that we can annotate pure constructs. This reduced our build time reduced the build time of Angular applications with about another 10%. But the biggest optimization that we did was to enable persistent build caching, which dropped the build time with up to 68%, depending on the changes that you're making to your assets and depending on whether you have the cache resources and intermediate artifacts already on the disk or not. A couple of other features in version 13 are around Adobe font inlining. So now when you run your build step, if you have Adobe fonts, we're going to inline their definitions directly in index.html so that your users have faster experience when loading a page. As I mentioned already, the Webpack 5 caching is enabled by default. We have new features around form controls and better accessibility. So what are we building next? These are some of the incremental improvements. We'll be extending the analysis of the Angular compiler. Angular has a compiler which is a great plus. The compiler allows us to statically verify the correctness of your application before you ship it to production. So in order to guarantee that you don't have any security vulnerabilities or any performance regressions, we can extend the analysis of the compiler to throw not only type errors, but also point out to you when you can make improvements on top of your application. This is one of the initiatives that we have been working on. And the first change that we roll out, which is behind a flag currently, is the banana in a box syntax. We are going to show you an error if you have made a mistake in your banana in a box syntax. If you make a box in a banana rather than a banana in a box, for instance. We're working on simplifying Angular by removing the factory APIs. This is going to be a large effort with a bunch of shims in the meantime and a bunch of transforms. So we are going to make it in the least breaking way possible, but also we're going to notice that you'll have to deal with fewer verbose APIs. We're working on more advanced guides. This is part of our documentation efforts, and also on the rollout of MVC Web. This is something that we're going to kick off in the next couple of months, where we're transforming our component toolkit to more material design compatible implementation, reusing some of the material design primitives directly in the Angular components. The biggest effort that we're focused on right now, though, is standalone components. We have been getting a lot of feedback from the community that ng modules could be hard for beginners to think about, to just comprehend. They have a lot of responsibilities around configuring component compilation scope, to dealing with dependency injection, to helping you with the modularity of your application, and more. With standalone components, we're going to move the dependencies of your components with your components, directives, and pipes within their metadata, so they stay closer to the corresponding primitive declaration. This way, it will be easier to keep track of what exactly is being used in your components and directives and pipes. And also, beginners would not have to really deal with ng modules until, let's say, certain project size. One reminder, standalone components doesn't mean that we're going to get rid of ng modules. Many people are using ng modules and they find them very valuable. So they're going to stick in the framework, and we're not going to remove them by invalidating all the existing projects out there. We're just going to make them optional for certain use cases. Here is an example how this would work for a Hello World application. This is a very basic Hello World component, which if you're building a traditional Angular app, you have to take and put into an app module, which you later bootstrap. With standalone components, this will be your whole application. You're going to have a standalone flag as part of the component metadata, and we're going to introduce a bootstrap component API that allows you to bootstrap a single component. Additionally, if this Hello World component had any dependencies, we'll have had a property within the component called uses or imports that declares these dependencies. Having standalone components, we'll be able to continue building on top. We'll be able to build better APIs for lazy loading on more lower level of granularity and more friendly syntax. It will allow us to improve the router, the bootstrap process, and you saw, and way more. We'll be communicating that in the form of RFCs or feature requests, so please feel free to comment. We really, really respect the feedback that we're getting from the community, and you're helping us find a lot of corner cases that we have not necessarily thought about all the time. So looking forward to what we're going to build together. Thank you very much. I would love to answer your questions after James's talk.
Thank you very much, Minko. We didn't see all the slides, but we listened carefully.
Sorry for that.
No problem. And the next talk is by James Daniels. James will share with us more about providing better developer experience with Angular Universal.
All right, just 1 second. It seems like my camera battery has died. So let me switch cameras here. Great timing. All right.
Great.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm James Daniels. I'm with Developer Relations on the Firebase team, and I work with Minko a lot and the Angular team because I'm the Angular Fire maintainer. As I heard at the last, overheard in the hallway at the last Angular conference I was at in person. Oh, there we go. No, not David East. That other guy. That's me. So the Firebase team, we really love Angular. Not only because they're both tools made by Google and we're very close to them and work with them, but we've invested a lot and we actually build our stuff in Angular, right? So the Firebase console is built in Angular. We have a lot of Angular experience on the team, deep connections, and we kind of popped up at that same era of the internet, right? Where Angular came around the same time Firebase as a startup did. And, you know, that Angular Fire library has been very popular for a long time. And I was lucky enough to inherit it once I joined the Firebase team. And there's really great integrations there, right? I really love dependency injection. Before I joined Google, I was a Ruby on Rails person and an Ember person, so I really like conventions and structure around my projects. So there's all kinds of reasons why we like Angular and we're close to them, beyond just that we're Googlers. That said, we're DevRel, we're engineers, we got to support our libraries. We've been playing around with Next.js a lot, and I think there's a lot of cool concepts there. And is gaining a lot of mind share in our teams, right? Like our leaders are very excited about Next.js. It kind of pushes the envelope in ways, but all this stuff is possible in Angular. And part of it is just developer experience. So none of this are things that are going to be shipping in Angular soon. This is just, we are playing around the other week and hacking on things, and maybe we'll put together an RFC. But ultimately, I want to have a conversation, talk about ways that we can improve the developer experience. So things that are hard now are easy in the future. And that really changes things. So first and foremost is pre-rendering, right? We have pre-rendering of static content, of static routes, right? You can put guess in there and it'll guess your routes and start iterating through those. Right now, if you have dynamic routes, right, you have parameters in there, then guess.js isn't going to parse those. It's going to skip them. You could work around this, of course, by writing a prerender.txt file. But as I'll get into a little bit, there's reasons why that doesn't work great in the Firebase world, and maybe we can improve things. So, yeah, here we go. These are your routes, if you're familiar. Guess.js will get those too, right? And right now, it'll skip those, unless you go down the path of a prerender.txt. But if you played with Next.js or some of the other frameworks that solve problems like this, Next.js has a getStaticPaths, right? You just export getStaticPaths function, and you provide a list of strings. And in the Firebase world, what you can do there is getStaticPaths, use the admin SDK to query over all your products, and it builds the URLs for you. So to me, this is, again, one of those things that, like, you could do it in Angular, but is there a better developer experience? Second, state transfer. All the tools are there, right? For example, this is how you could use state transfer with Firestore bundles. Firestore bundles are actually really cool. Right now, Firestore is a serverless database. You get charged for every read, which, reads are really cheap. But, engineers tend to freak out when they see things like, oh, every time I'm reading from the database and every customer is going to be reading from the database. Is there a way I can cache that? So Firestore bundles allow you to cache that initial fetch and then serve that to every customer. So it'd be great if we did this during a pre-render step, right? So this is how you could use state transfer to do this today. First and foremost, you got to make a state key. Then we go ahead and we use Firestore admin. Unfortunately, you have to use the admin SDK right now to build bundles. And Angular Fire doesn't have a integration for that out of the box right now. So you have to go ahead and build it yourself. You go get the collection, put it through your class converter. And then you got to do a lot of manual Zone.js stuff right now, right? So you get the collections, got to keep the zone unstable so the page doesn't render without content. We go ahead, we add that result to the bundle. We then set it to the state transfer. Then we map it as we normally would to get our data. And then we set our rendered data over on the state transfer. So there's a lot to do here, right? It's possible. There's a lot going on. There's things here that Angular Fire could fix. There's things here that, maybe a better state transfer, but it's just a lot, right? And you have to do this for every query in your app, right? This is just a lot of boilerplate, a lot of things to do. Finally, rehydration, right? That was just rendering the content. If we want to take that content, especially from Firestore, because it's a real-time source, if we want to take that content, reload everything on the browser, get our components up and running again and interactive again, and then reconnect that real-time stream, that's a lot more work. So again, we gotta get our stuff from our state transfer. We gotta build an observable right now to load the bundle from the Firestore and the state transfer. Wait for it to be successed. Then we gotta go down all this path of rebuilding everything and getting our snapshots again. Again, this is something that we're working to improve in Angular Fire, but it's still a lot of conceptual overhead. And again, you have to do this for every single query in your application. So it can just be a lot of work. So Next.js, for those that haven't used it, have functions like this: get static paths, get static props, get server props, things that solve some of these problems without having to think about state transfer and how that stuff's moving around, getting plumbed. So something that David East and I were playing around with the other week is, could we add in your route a pre-render function, right? So we have a dynamic route here. We have product/ID. Then we have a pre-render function, which is a promise. And inside of it, we go and we query all of our products. We get them. And then we map over them. We get the bundle. But here you have, it returns parameters. And what this would do is this would be the equivalent of going ahead and writing a pre-rendered text of all the product/ID in your Firestore. And the cool thing is it's all here covered here in this pre-render function. No need to pull out a text file and get hacking on how are you going to build that text file. You got to write a little script to generate this text file and all that silliness. Finally, there's a new concept here which you can't easily do in Angular today, which is we go ahead and in that same step expose the data that we fetch from Firestore. That way it's not an additional read when it gets to the pre-render step. That data was actually built in this pre-render. So how would we inject it? So we made a new injection token so you could inject those static props and you get your myProps back. You're typed as myProps object. And then of course to rehydrate that. So if you just wanted to statically render it, that's great. But to rehydrate it, we still have a lot of work here that we got to do on the Firestore end. You know, we can clean that up on the Angular Fire side. But ultimately, with this one function here, where pre-rendering dynamic routes in our application, getting all those set, and that pre-rendered data is getting built in to the pre-rendered page in one step. No additional needing to synchronize the logic, no duplication there. So this is kind of doing double duty for us. Now, I walked through that, and it's still a lot of code. I mentioned a little bit that I'm coming from the Rails world. I'm coming from the Ember world. So I love convention over configuration. So the next step in our hacking was seeing if we could come up with a better pattern here. So when you have this pre-render function, and note our path, right? So we have product ID here. We have it's going over the Firestore product collection, and the ID is the Firestore key. This seems like something that we can really clean up with convention over configuration. So what if we just did this, where you can pass pre-render Firestore docs? And what this would do is it would look over the Firestore collection with the same path here, right? So if it matches, then it goes ahead and it fetches that from Firestore. It pre-renders all those product pages. Very cool. We built that, actually. This is all working. It's not anywhere near being ready to ship, right? This is just a 1-week hackathon project. But I think there's some interesting concepts that we could bring to Angular here. Further, right, when we rehydrate that statically rendered content, right now, still manual. We actually built this where you can go ahead and you can use the injection token pre-rendered doc from Angular Firestore. Grab that, and you can get, by default, very easily, you can get that pre-rendered content. But then it's dynamic. So then all you need to do is .subscribe, and that'll take that rehydrated content and then reconnect it up to the Firestore real-time listener. So the great thing here is we pre-rendered all these pages. We've included Firestore bundles. So when your customers hit the page, they're not reading from Firestore. They're reading from that cache. That cache rehydrates. And then you only get billed for an additional read if and when that data has changed since the last pre-render. So this could take, a popular page, say you have an e-commerce app, right? This could take millions of reads and turn it into 2 reads, right? N+1. So really great to take down those reads, to take down the load on your database, and really make your app faster, better. And if you combine this with lazy loading, right, you have this pre-rendered content. You have the JSON ready to go, and you could lazy load Firestore. You could even be smart about it, right? If the customer was over a 3G connection, or low data mode, or their phone had low battery, or performance problems, you could, instead of subscribing to that and getting the real-time connection, just do a .get and do a REST call. So you swap out that WebSocket with the real-time connection for just a one-time fetch, just to make sure that the data is fresh. Or you could just use the pre-rendered content. This would work really great for offline content. And then the cool thing is that from here, all that content is stored in the browser's Firestore offline. So if the app was offline and you enter here, you have that cache. They click around and everything's still cached and working as expected in offline mode. So right now, this you could do this. It would take dozens of lines of code per module. And this is really the value of making a good developer experience is, could we do this in 3-4 lines of code, right? As opposed to dozens per component. So I mentioned this is just a hackathon project. David and I were messing around because we've been messing around with Next.js and we really like Angular, and we thought there might be the ability to translate some of these ideas into the Angular ecosystem. This is just a Hack Week project. This is not super serious. But you know what? I think there's something here, and we're interested in exploring it. So really, we're looking to solicit feedback, where we want to talk to the community. We want to work more with the Angular team to see if there's a future here for this idea, and ship that cool integration with our existing ng deploy. Right? ng deploy is really cool. If you haven't used it, ng add at AngularFire, then type ng deploy, and your app, whether it's server rendered or just static, is pre-rendered and deployed to Firebase host and given a custom domain and an SSL certificate, and just that one command. It's really cool stuff, and would like to take that integration further, and especially with ideas here making pre-rendering more powerful and integrating with Firestore better. After we solicit feedback, we're happy to start down this RFC process that Minko outlined. Really make it a community contribution. We are Googlers, but we're not inside the Angular team. I like the idea of coming at it from a community perspective. Also, there's other concepts that Next.js has, like incremental pre-rendering, right? ISR in that world. And the idea here would be, if you have a large e-commerce site with millions of products, pre-rendering the entire site on every deploy, that's rough, right? You don't want to do that. You want that to be asynchronous. So maybe we can explore that and see what asynchronous pre-rendering might look like. Maybe do some tight integrations here with Cloud Build and other tooling within the Google ecosystem with that ng deploy command. Not sure what that would look like, but it's something that we're interested in exploring. And then finally, could we go full server-generated components? As in, you put out a static component. All of that code is only run in Node.js. That component, when it gets to the browser, is static HTML. It's static. It's not moving. It's not going anywhere. This is great for things like table of contents, or if you're writing documentation, stuff like that. Simple things like headers and footers on your page. Maybe some of that's, based off of private APIs, right? It's things that only work within your intranet that you don't want to expose to the outside world. So private HTTP APIs, private APIs. Maybe you don't want the client to load the Firebase admin bundle, right? Or expose any of those keys. So I think there is a future that, you know, pure static generated components could work really well in the Angular ecosystem. I'm not sure about you know, how that would fit in with the build pipeline though. So just again, thoughts on things that we can improve with an Angular. And yeah, I've been hacking on this. There's a couple things I threw up on GitHub. None of this is shippable. But if you're interested in seeing how the hell I managed to do this, you can go to GitHub. Some of this work is up there. I hacked around on Guest.js, Angular Universal, and of course the work in AngularFire. Yeah, we don't have an RFC yet. This is just messing around and having some fun. Really, just wanted to start the conversation. If you want to get at me on Twitter, that's my handle right there, James Uriah. And of course, I will be around for questions here. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. If you decide to build the next NG, I'll be glad to contribute.
Excellent.
Okay, we can now move to questions. I have one question for Minko regarding standalone components. So is there a plan to include standalone components in version 14 or 15 maybe?
It's probably going to be in a minor version because they are not breaking anything into the framework. They're just an incremental feature. So I'm expecting them to land somewhere in version 13 point something, maybe 0.1 or 0.2.
Great.
Yeah, because they're not too much work from engineering perspective. It mostly takes us time to see how we can do them right. So yeah. But nice. Still, this doesn't mean that we're going to ship them in version 13 point something. We may ship them in 14. It's going to be next year.
Yeah. Okay. And the next question is, can you tell us more about progressing on typed forms in your Angular versions?
Yeah, we have been talking about typed forms for years now, haven't we? We released we're going to share an RFC, which is like already written. I need to read it myself. We're going to share it in the next couple of weeks. And from there, we're going to collect feedback for a couple of weeks. And after that, we're going to move forward with an implementation. So type forms, they may introduce some breaking changes. So I would assume that they may land in, they're not going to land in a minor version of 13 for sure. Yeah, that's it. For sure, I'm very confident that we're going to improve the typings of forms in general forms, scalability of forms as well next year, which is in like 23 days.
Okay, and the next question from Laden is also for Minko. Do you know, are there any other open source project using AIO documentation tooling except NGRX?
I know that RxJS is also using a website that is based on top of what we have on Angular.io. And Marco, maybe you have more information about Rx documentation already?
Yeah, we are using the Geni library for generating documentation based on the GSDoc. I think it's pretty much it's very similar to how it works in Angular.io.
And also there are a lot of localized versions of Angular.io that are also based on the same framework.
Okay. And the last question for today is, are there any future plans for Angular and server-side rendering?
Yeah, there are some discussions we have been working on Universal for years now. There are also some discussions for that we just kicked off the second half of last week, and we were discussing yesterday as well. There are going to be some improvements. It's still early to talk about them, and also James didn't just help with some further inspiration today. In the next couple of next year, when we are ready to commit to a larger project related to Universal, we're going to communicate this with our roadmap or an RFC. But Universal is an important part of the ecosystem, so we're planning to work on improving it further.
Yeah, I surprised Minko with this talk today a little bit too, because I've been out on paternity leave, so I haven't had a chance to sync with him on some of this content. But other things that are server-side rendering, if you are using ngDeploy, if you are using Google technologies here, there's actually some great improvements to Cloud Functions coming along, Cloud Run. So if you are deploying that stuff on Google technologies, keep an eye out. Maybe sign up for the Firebase alpha testers. That'd be a good way to get started there.
Okay, since we have no more questions, we can finish for today. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks again to James and Minko for the great talks and presentation, and see you next year. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us. Cheers.
Bye-bye.